So good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Oxford Real Farming Conference session about the Northern Real Farming Conference. It's lovely to see you all here this morning. I'm Ellen, I'm the coordinator for the Northern Real Farming Conference, and I'm joined by Hannah, Anna and Rod. So I'm just going to hand over to them to introduce themselves as well. So Hannah.
Morning, hope you're all doing well. I'm Hannah. So I guess I'm coming as myself today. I wear a few different hats, working with mainly the upland farming rural community, both within my PhD research, looking at common land governance and value and decision making, and with my freelance work, I work as the coordinator for the Cumbria Inquiry for the Food Farming and Countryside Commission, and do other bits of kind of natural landscapes projects and consultation. Yeah, so it's great to be here. Thanks.
Hi everyone, my name's Anna and I'm based in Lancaster, so northwest near Manchester, and I coordinate a network called Food Futures, which is North Lancashire Sustainable Food Place Network. And the Northern Real Farming Conference idea sort of came out of that through Rod, who's here attending a working group meeting after having been to the Oxford Real Farming Conference and thinking it really important to start something up in the north. And I also helped set up a community grain agriculture project called Clover Hill.
Thank you. Rod?
I'm a farmer from the top end of the Forest of Bowland. I make apple cider vinegar is one of my main products that I have. A lot of beautiful woodland and a beautiful bit of land, but I've been involved in Food Futures and with the Northern Real Farming Conference. I suppose I'm a researcher a lot of the time.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen. Perfect. So in terms of our session this morning, we're going to spend a little bit of time just providing a bit of introduction to the Northern Real Farming Conference story. And I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to hand over to Rod and Hannah, who are going to talk about some of the themes which have come out of the conference and highlight some of the kind of learning and key questions. And then we're going to end the presentations with an input, a sort of a summary of some of the key questions that came out of the visioning session that we had at the end of the in-person Northern Real Farming Conference. And then we thought we would invite discussion and experience sharing around some of these key themes, which have applicability across a range of contexts, and it would be really helpful to have some conversation and input on. So in terms of our story, as Anna mentioned, I think this was the Northern Real Farming Conference is really down to Rod, and he might add some of his own experiences when he shares. But after the Oxford Real Farming Conference in January 2020, there was inspiration to run something specifically focused on northern farming. And I think we felt it was important to address the kind of unique landscapes and cultures and background of the north particularly. I think there was a recognition that farmers felt connected by the kind of northern identity, and we felt that it was useful to bring together this community as a sort of dedicated space. We wanted to build the networks, we wanted to highlight and share case studies, particularly from the north, and obviously have chance to share approaches and build maybe a greater voice in terms of sort of policy input and policy decision making. So the idea was really developed just as COVID hit. So we had originally planned an in-person event in the autumn of 2020, but we ran our first conference as an online space. We had huge number of sessions, 65 sessions, 500 participants for the first conference, and that really set the groundwork for the continuation of the work and the conference from last year. So last year we combined an online conference with an in-person as well. So we had around 100 people at an in-person session in Lancaster, and we combined a number of workshop and plenary sessions with brainstorming and visioning, networking, and a range of farm visits too. And we concluded that conference with a big 2-hour visioning session about where we go next and what the needs of the network are and how we should take things forward. And it's some of those themes that we'd like to return to and talk through a bit more at the end. So yeah, so these have been the aims of the conference for the last 2 years. So about supporting this transition to a more regenerative and holistic approaches, supporting nature recovery, discussing supply chains and distribution, showcasing these northern successes or examples, building the networks, and building our understanding and knowledge. So with that as context, I'm going to hand over to Rod, who's going to talk in more detail about the themes. Over to you, Rod.
Thank you. I mean, just over 2 years ago, I was trying to get to the Oxford Real Farming Conference, and there were no tickets left because there were, well over 1,000 people already booked. Very fortunately, someone from the Pasture-Fed Livestock Association put up a note to say, that we've got a spare ticket. So I managed to get hold of that ticket and get along. And it was the idea, because it was so difficult to get tickets, because there were so many people there, really sharing it out, spreading it out a bit further seemed to be a really important thing to do. And during the process of being there, I ended up sitting next to people who were fundraisers for the conference, for the ORFC, sitting next to other people who thought the idea of having a northern one was a good idea. So it seemed as though all the ideas were pushing towards a positive outcome for it. So at the end of the conference, I had a chat with Colin Tudge, and he was very supportive of the idea. And we've had fantastic support from the ORFC team throughout all the process of building up the Northern Real Farming Conference. So one of the things really was who do we connect to? So actually looking at keeping an ear to the ground, finding out what's going on in the north is something that I found really interesting. It was there's so many different organisations: the Pasture-Fed Livestock Association, the Land Workers Alliance, Soil Association of Scotland, Scottish Agroforestry Scheme, all sorts of groups like that were really key to getting it going. But actually having that ear to the ground and actually what's happening in little crevices. So there's maybe just one person doing something exciting up in the north, trying to find out who those people were. But I think we managed to bring a good collection together. Parts that was missing and still missing really is the fishing part of the fish side. So it'd be really nice to find out what's happening exciting on the fish side. Some of the in-person visits that we've managed to organise over these last 2 years is one to Neil Heseltine's farm, where the protected landscapes talks. One to Sam Beaumont's up in the Lake District, which is where they've got a wilder culture system using holistic management. And one of the things that's really exciting with Sam, heard him talking just earlier, and his cows are growing about two kilos a day, and he's selling them out at 25 months old. So a really positive outcome from a mob grazing system, and a really exciting way of looking at mob grazing, getting lots of wildflowers going at the same time. Then there was a walk with Bill and Kath Grayson, who are experts on conservation grazing. There was a visit to Claver Hill, which Anna was one of the main people setting it up. And Claver Hill is also somewhere I've been working with flood management, but I think that's a really exciting community project growing vegetables. We also had a walk around Lancaster looking at hope spots where we can put little small areas of growing food around the town to really offer sort of free food, but engaging people with eating locally. We had a visit to Low Sizer Farm up near Kendal, and that's an exciting farm. It's organic farm, then it stopped being organic, and then it became went through a holistic management course and ended up going back into organic. And really, I think they've taken off since then. A really interesting dairy farm, and farm shop, and also they've linked with Growing Well, which is a community supported agriculture scheme, where they've got exciting vegetable growing, but it's also a care farm at the same time. I also ran some flood walks around my farm. So those are all things that were happening on the ground. So I think it's really important, that connection of people, and the more we can do of that, the better. So what are some of the problems that we have in the north? Weather is one of the things that how the climate's changing. One of the things that I'll just read you is, one of the things I did earlier on this year is to walking up to COP with a group of pilgrims called Listening to the Land. And this is just a little bit, as we went through from Shap Fell. The weather was abysmal, a yellow weather warning, ideally. Stay inside. So we walked through gale force winds, flooding and torrential rain. It was too cold to stop for longer than a minute or two. We gulped down soggy sandwiches, crouched under a farmer's stone wall whose shelter we shared with some shivering sheep. At this point, I realized the ventilation zips of my waterproof had been open all morning. I was soaked. I looked at one of the sheep, and for a brief moment, I swear we shared the knowledge that today was just one of those days you had to get through. Was I beginning to get this listening business, or was hypothermia setting in? Time to move on. We soldiered on, heads bent to the wind. We did what we always do at challenging moments. We sang to pass the miles. Idle chit-chat wasn't possible. Talking over the howling rain required elevating your voice to just below a scream. The final mile, we bet disaster. The ford was completely flooded. Some sensible folks turned around and went the long way round. 3 of us, however, did what you should definitely not do. We forded the very fast-flowing, waist-deep river. It was hairy. We clung to the stepping stones with one arm, used our poles to keep us from being pulled under. One slip and you were swept away. All of us made it. I think that gives you some idea of the sort of weather conditions that we've been going through up in the north. So actually looking at the weather is as important part of the future. The other thing that we walked over, as we were walking, we went through sort of north of England up into southern Scotland, and going through all sorts of different landscapes and meeting different people, listening to what they were talking about, listening to their worries about the future. We've managed to get a few places. We stopped at Susan's farm just north of Carlisle and had pasture-fed livestock meat from their cattle and their sheep, and pumpkins that she produced. So that was really, really nice to have organic diet. But actually on the way, there was very little organic food that we could get hold of. Most of it was out of supermarkets. It was poor quality food, full of chemicals. And you could really, because I lived normally on an organic diet, I could really feel that pulling me down. And it's the realization that actually you can't get alternative food in a lot of these places. So actually it's really important to try and see how we can get a healthy food system, a local food system that supports us in the future. One moment, just when we went into Scotland, we had a lady ran across the fields to us and said, "I've got some Viking stew for you. I'm going to make you Viking porridge tonight." And that was one thing. She'd grown all her own apples. She'd made us this Viking stew out of oats and local ingredients. And she talked to us a lot about some of the forestry that had been replanted. So trying to get some of the native trees back into the landscape. Later on in the walk, we also met some of the COVID family. I think there might have been ravens, there might have been, I'm not sure, or jackdaws, but they were planting acorns. And it was really nice to see the wildlife planting acorns, actually saying, here we need more trees in this landscape. Not the conifers that we've been walking through a lot of the time, which have since then, a lot of them have blown down with the gales. So we need a sustainable long-term landscape. So maybe some of the things that we need to think about really is human health, maybe the ownership of the food system. At the moment, it's owned by investment companies. We have seed theft, we have pesticides that are tied in with the trade negotiations. We have destroying rainforests to feed our cattle. So really, if we went back 50 years and imagined the crazy situation we have at the moment, would we have really thought that we could end up with a system that relied on importing feed for our cattle from the other side of the world, spraying it with pesticides, that we heard at one of the talks yesterday? So really, how's the Northern Real Farming Conference trying to change that narrative? So some of the things we heard about were small projects that stimulate the imagination. Citizen Grain up in Scotland, looking at bread clubs, growing some of the old population wheats. Scotland the Bread, who are organising flour to the people, soil to the slice. Or Local Wool near Lancaster, where you're getting local wool, supporting the farmers, getting a reasonable price for the farm, but also getting a really nice quality product coming out of it. Or cow and calf dairy. Just after the Northern Real Farming Conference, I carried on with some Land Workers Alliance back up to Sizer 4 farm. And there I was talking to one of the farmers who was from Derbyshire, and they'd got a cow and calf dairy. And just they'd found that their 5-month-old calf that had been sharing the milk with them, they actually get a better price for that 5-month-old calf than the 30-year-old stock that they were normally selling. Other things are just this Farm Start project in Lancaster, small growing areas. So just finding out how people can grow, teaching people how to grow. And I find that really, really sort of exciting. Other areas that we covered during the conference were things like valuing natural capital, flood management, race and ethnicity, particularly with some vets involved. Food hubs, how local food hubs can really help support an alternative food system. Seed sovereignty, succession. What happens with land is one thing I have myself. What happens next? How can I keep this farm working regeneratively? So there was a film, Now But a Fleeting Thing, which is a really nice film which we had last year. Then there's also looking at the soil biology. What is it that's, can the microbes be developed? Can we build up better soils? And also the pasture-fed livestock, how that's helping with mob grazing to build the soil fertility. We also had sessions on agroforestry, on animal feed, how soya alternatives to soya, sprouted seeds, or even the possibility of using soldier fly larvae as a feed for poultry. A really exciting project was the elms, was the was Vet Sustain, which is a group of vets up in the north who are working towards reducing their veterinary inputs. And one of the parts of their talk was talking about dung beetles, and it was really exciting how the chemicals that we're using to remove worms are killing the dung beetles, but they're also killing the little mites on the legs of the dung beetles, which are really important for reducing the number of flies that we get fly strike from. So looking at how the ecological cycles fit together, those are all things that really, to me, are important things to understand. We also had links from abroad. We had a talks about the Japanese rural development systems. And we also had from the permaculture for refugees, we had Rosemary Morrow and Marguerite Carl talking about how we can help with a refugee or similar communities growing food. And there's some amazing projects, particularly one on Lesbos now, where the refugees have been going through permaculture training, and they're now at the point where they're producing food not just for themselves, but also for some of the islanders of Lesbos. So they're reconnecting with the local community. We've also had some exciting work with the arts. So we've had tunes and music. We had tunes from Wind Pop Farm, where they do conservation grazing. We had songs from Steve Lewis, who's been involved with Extinction Rebellion, looking at the peat issues. And also one of the things they did in the summer was have a music and storytelling on my farm. And that is something that Steve Lewis was involved. And finally, we also had the Michelle Scally-Clark, who did a wonderful job of actually collecting all the ideas together, and all those ideas coming together into a poem. And she did it very beautifully and with lots of humor and excitement. And I think in a way that it's sort of something about the storytelling. What is the storytelling? What's the future? So for me, what is the story of our future? Can we create something really exciting? For me, the key parts are getting a living soil, getting healthy food, getting a thriving economics, and really to try and get to the point where nature smiles. If we can get nature smiling, that would be very exciting for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rod. I think we're going to hand straight over to Hannah, and then there'll be plenty of time for discussion after that. Over to you, Hannah.
That's great. Thanks, Ellen, and thanks, Rod. Rod has mentioned many of the people that I've had the privilege to connect with, the farmers, the different communities, and people doing some really exciting work. So I'm going to talk about more kind of generally in terms of the challenges and the opportunities in the uplands. So I'm just going to share my screen quickly. Thank you very much to Ellen for inviting me to talk today, and also thank you to the Northern Real Farming Conference team really for allowing me to be part of the journey. So I was contributing to the first Northern Real Farming Conference back in 2020, and we actually launched the Cumbria Inquiry for the Food Farming and Countryside Commission at that conference, which was really exciting, and getting input from people all across the north and over the border in Scotland into what the inquiry could look like, as well as having obviously many local conversations as well. So it's been great to be involved, and I was also contributing at the more recent one, as well as really enjoying attending the first in-person event, which was really exciting. I'll talk about one of the farm visits I joined as part of that. So as I said, I'm going to talk through some of the broader kind of challenges and opportunities in the uplands, and I've put northern in brackets because I'm sure that there'll be a lot of read across to uplands in general, and also beyond that to kind of farming in general. Some of the challenges and opportunities might be specific to the uplands, but hopefully kind of it'll be useful to create a picture of what's currently happening, and yeah, how we might be able to go forward. So Rod, again, he's done a good job of kind of bringing us into the weather systems of the uplands and how extreme those can be. But just to give a picture of the different sorts of landscapes you might come across, which I'm sure you're all kind of aware of, but if you imagine yourself in the uplands, you might think about obviously hills, lots of hills of different shapes and sizes with craggy bits and sharp pointy bits. And then obviously wide open spaces of peatlands and moorlands, the woodlands, which tend to follow the watercourses through the landscape, and then big blocks of forestry maybe. as well as ancient woodlands. There's lots of hedgerows and walls that divide up the landscape, as well as many pathways that carry humans and animals through the landscape as well. Water is obviously a huge benefit in the uplands, can be a massive issue with flooding, but water is obviously a key part of the uplands as well. And in terms of what people are doing in the uplands, there's a lot of hill farming, of course, which is now predominantly livestock farming. It used to be a bit more mixed enterprises, and there's people starting to mix their livestock and do some more veg growing and things now. There's obviously forestry, which I've mentioned, and woodland. There's still coppice work that happens, and hedgerows, obviously maintaining hedgerows. There's more hedge laying starting to happen now, and of course there's a lot of pressure in the uplands through recreation. Especially that was really highlighted through COVID, and how many people want to be out and enjoying our landscapes, may not necessarily have all of the experience to be high up in the hills, but the want and desire to connect to our landscapes is something that's really important, particularly in the uplands. And I've just specifically mentioned here common land, because that is a particular type of common that again relates to recreation, because it's open access land, so people can go over and enjoy it. There's a lack of fences, so people can wander across the moor and through the woodlands. And although it's low land cover nationally in England, so 3%, in Cumbria and in the Lake District, there's a high concentration, because a lot of the remaining commons tend to be in the uplands. So up here in Cumbria, so I'm based just on the northern edge of the Lake District. Then we've got the Yorkshire Dales, where there's a lot of common land as well, Shropshire Hills moving further south, and then Dartmoor, and then other lowland commons, etc. So common land is a bit of a feature up here in the uplands, and it's a particular way to manage land. It needs to be managed collectively to some extent, because you have normally one or more landowners, and then you have people who have rights of access and use. So as I mentioned, there's access for recreation purposes, but then you've got farmers who have rights of access to graze their animals on the land. So when you walk across a common, you'll see maybe sheep and cattle and ponies, and they'll be owned and looked after by commoners. So yeah, kind of interacting with the remnant common land kind of post enclosure is an important aspect of the uplands. So I'm just going to run through some of the challenges, and there's a lot of challenges in the uplands. I've already mentioned a few of them. This looks like it's a fairly short list, but these are huge issues that need to be kind of dealt with, unpicked, are part of rural communities' day-to-day lives. So yeah, these reflections are drawn from my interactions with the farming community, with other organisations, environmental NGOs, kind of cross-sector working, forestry, woodlands, people working in different roles kind of across the land and nature-based sector, and drawing together these kind of my hearings and interactions, conversations with people. There's a few things that come up a lot. So one of the things I've highlighted is mindset change. So I've already heard that multiple times through the Oxford Real Farming Conference, also at the Northern Real Farming Conference, and this need for people who live in the uplands, farmers, but also others, in terms of the way policy is changing. So as Rod mentioned, the narrative is changing, and we're not really sure where that's going yet. There's a lot of uncertainty around policy, which is really going to impact people's livelihoods in our kind of rural communities in the uplands in particular, because it's marginal land, and there's a reliance on the support for delivery of public goods, which is a move away from a focus on food production. So there's this changing focus in the uplands, and this requires a mindset change of those people who are looking after our landscapes, and there's different reactions to kind of those changes. And of course, this is all surrounded by the climate and nature crises. So I've mentioned about flooding, but we've also been really suffering with a lack of water as well. Water is just, it's so important, the way it affects our uplands, and the need to kind of recover our peatlands, restore our peatlands to hold more water, and for more water to be held in the upstream of the catchment in the uplands. So yeah, and then there's the lack of water, which has caused increased incidence of wildfires, which has really affected fodder and grazing for livestock, people's access to spaces. Obviously, it's really dangerous. It can affect the peat as well. And so, yeah, there's lots of issues, obviously, from the climate and nature crises, which cover all of these challenges and the need for change. Also in the uplands, I'm sure a lot of people will know about how contested these spaces are. There's a lot of multiple, sometimes conflicting, sometimes synergistic, and sometimes really polarizing debates and conversations around land use, what the requirements of land are, and how it should be looked after and managed. And this has created quite contested spaces, as I say, I'm sure you're all aware of kind of the rewilding versus farming debates, kind of the changing the way different estates are managed, and how that should go. So it's unfortunately creating this polarizing debate. But on the ground locally, and Rod mentioned one of the examples was Sam and Claire Beaumont, Wilder Galborough Hall Farm, which is at Olswater, and they're combining rewilding and farming and finding that middle ground where we can be producing really high quality food while supporting nature recovery, soil recovery. And it's finding those kind of middle ground, which is really important, but it's not easy. It's very challenging. Yeah, so a couple of the other kind of challenges, one of the ones I've highlighted is navigating financial kind of opportunities which are coming up, which are really unclear. So you've got the public finance, so the environmental land management scheme opportunities coming through. We've just had the announcement that countryside stewardship is going up by 30%, and people needing to navigate what the best options are for their farm and their land that they're managing. And then we've got this rising focus on private finance and how that's going to feature for the uplands in particular, as I say, because they're marginal lands, and there's a lot of push for nature recovery, rewilding, peatland restoration, as well as producing good food in the uplands from the farming kind of perspective, and trying to navigate the financial support for all of those different types of land uses, and what that might look like is very complex. And then you've got other types of funding as well. So there's grant funding, which can fund certain projects. So yeah, that's all very unclear still. There's a lack of detail, there's a lack of advice, a lack of information, although there is a lack of information detail, but there is also a lot of information, and it's actually even trying to navigate that. So a recent meeting between well, it's a joint meeting with the RSPB and the Farmer Network, met with farmers, and one of the key things that came up is actually there's so much information that even just navigating that is a real challenge. I don't know if you've tried to interact with the gov.uk website, but it doesn't make logical sense, basically, and just trying to navigate that while you're trying to say run a farm, run a forestry enterprise, it's really challenging. So yeah, that's another one of the challenges. And another one I just wanted to really highlight is the need for a wider range of skills, knowledge, expertise to support the uplands, and the mosaic of different types of skills and people we need working in the landscapes. So there isn't currently the training provision. One of the sessions I helped to organise and run was looking at building a vibrant workforce in our landscapes, and that was linked to the development of the Land and Nature Skills Service with my kind of Food Farming Countryside Commission hat on, and how we need more diverse people, more diverse skills, more diversity in the landscapes. There's this common theme of diversity across social and ecological parts of the uplands environment. So yeah, that's just a quick run through of some of the challenges, and as I say, they are big challenges, but I didn't want to kind of leave it there and leave it on a potentially a negative note. So I'll go on to the opportunities as well. But before I do that, I've just got a quote there, which is around the governance, establishing rules or protocols for access and use, taking care of and accepting responsibility for a resource, and distributing the benefits in ways that take into account the well-being of others. So that's where kind of I'm going to lead into the opportunities, where we need to be working collectively towards addressing these challenges. Up in the top left corner, I've highlighted what I felt were some of the real kind of vibrant and vital opportunities that we are facing at the moment, whilst we're in this really liminal space of transition in multiple different ways. And so the top one, there's a lot of self-organisation happening. There's a lot of people on the spider diagram just to the left, towards the bottom, is more collaborative work is happening. So although there's a lack of information detail coming from the top down, in terms of policy detail and information about what people need to do on the ground, there's a lot of work, just people getting together and organising themselves to deliver what's needed, and to support with that navigation through the information that is coming through and making it locally relevant, delivering workshops for people to be able to access that information. So as I mentioned, like the Farmer Network and many others coming together to ensure that people can have access to the resources they need. And it's really starting to shift the narrative towards valuing a range of knowledge types. So one of the challenges I hadn't mentioned was that there's been a real focus on scientific knowledge, which hasn't necessarily been very well connected to what's actually happening on the ground and how to deliver on the ground, particularly around kind of ecosystems and what people need to do. So by engaging with the farming community, the people that practically engage with the land in the uplands, we're starting to have more value for the different knowledge types and the different experiences in the uplands, and more of the organisations across the board coming together to collaborate as well. So there's this amazing self-organisation which is happening on the ground to really just keep us moving forwards. There's a real opportunity to make decisions for your place, for your farm, for the piece of land you look after, for your community. which is linked with the self-organisation part, and there's more opportunities coming up now for land and nature-based work, although the opportunities aren't being well, again, they need to be navigated, and there aren't enough, say, paid work opportunities. There are going to become more and more of those opportunities available for people to really engage with their community and interact with landscape, and what that means for livelihoods, and creating more kind of vibrant communities, rebuilding our rural communities, which have suffered a lot over the last, say, kind of 20 years as small family farms have gone out of business, as young people have left the rural communities to go and find work in cities and elsewhere. And all of this kind of is really movement building. So there's a lot of movement building that's happening around the regenerative, agriculture, agroecology work. And there's a lot of movement where people want to access land, and communities want access to their local land for health and well-being benefits, but also potentially for work opportunities. And as I mentioned, this diversity, like increase in diversity in the types of work that might be relevant locally. So on the right hand side of the spider diagram, I've got bringing people in from other sectors. More people working in our landscapes, not our landscapes, but our landscapes. So it could be that we need more marketing, technological skills kind of coming into rural places and bringing other people in from other sectors, and kind of creating those opportunities which bring people, say, from more urban backgrounds into the rural spaces if that's where they want to be. Yeah, and there's also a growing interest in local and traceability food and products that have a story that people can really connect with. So another passion of mine is wool crafts, and being able to know where your fibre has come from, your wool or your nettle fibres or your linen, and being able to trace that and know that it's been produced well, say for benefits to nature, supporting local businesses, kind of having an awareness of that whole supply chain. So there's an increasing energy around that as well. So they're just some of the opportunities to try and, there are a lot of issues, and I'm not trying to brush those over, but there are also a lot of opportunities that are happening and being organised really from the bottom up, with some kind of interesting support coming from the top down as well. One of the recent grant funds that's been really interesting is the Farming in Protected Landscapes grant, which is specific to protected landscape authorities, so national parks and AONBs, but it's been a very open, kind of easy process to access the support for farmers and land managers to deliver projects which are really specific to their place and deliver on climate, nature, people's access to land, and these kind of key themes. And that's been really exciting to see what people have been able to do when they've engaged with that. I know that Maria from Dodgson Wood, for instance, a farmer down in the South Lakes, she managed to get one of her barns converted so her wool could be stored well, and she's now kind of making Lake District tweeds out of her wool and other farmers' wool. And she's also got a mobile refrigerator kind of unit for processing. I think it's for processing poultry. But yeah, it's essentially a mobile unit, so farmers can process their own animals to really kind of localize that food chain. So this grant and some other money that's coming through has been creating some exciting opportunities as well. So I just wanted to highlight my visit to Lund Farm during Northern Rural Farming Conference in December. During the in-person conference on the second day, there was a selection of visits we could join, and I went to Lund Farm. The visit was led by the Ribble Rivers Trust, and we did also get to meet the farmer. But I just wanted to highlight a few things from that visit. So the farm itself was mainly a sheep dairy with some beef cattle. And the farmer was very keen. He had actually kind of approached Ribble Rivers Trust and had really engaged with, he wanted a lot more trees on his land, he wanted to plant a lot more hedgerows to kind of stop the runoff into the water systems. And so he's been working really closely with the Ribble Rivers Trust, and I've had similar conversations with Eden Rivers Trust, where they're really engaged with the local kind of farmers and the farmers that they work with to help them to access grant funding, say for tree planting along water courses, giving advice around the ecology of the water that's associated with their land and what they can do to help improve it, which is also beneficial to their farm. They were talking about the animal welfare kind of benefits of having more shelter, fodder and forage for the animals to use from the hedgerows. So yeah, some of the other bits that were being spoken about was the carbon auditing that's done on the farm and finding ways to reduce carbon emissions. And this is associated with the contract that they're in with Sainsbury's for their sheep milk. And the need to reduce their kind of carbon footprint. There's been capital grants. So one of the ones that really stuck in my mind that I'd never thought about before was their slurry pit. The simple act of getting money to get a roof put on it means that the slurry is no longer watered down by rainfall. So from going to literally not being able to keep up with slurry spreading to now being able to be really selective as to when slurry is spread and doing it where they think it's needed the most, and it's reduced really considerably. I can't remember the numbers, but it was amazing, really, just that simple act of putting a roof on the slurry pit and the impact that's had on the farm, the farming practices, and really freed up the farmer to be doing other important work on the farm. And something again that came up was the importance of collaboration. And so yes, collaborating with Ribble Rivers Trust, but there's also neighbouring common land that they've been trying to work with, which has been a challenge because they can't find who actually manages it. But also working with Natural England has produced some challenges as well as some opportunities. The ground is very important for curlew and other wading bird species, and kind of navigating the protected kind of species element has been quite a challenge for them. So this need for collaboration and conversation and really building those relationships and trust has been really important for them. And then I just really quickly wanted to highlight some people that you can follow on Twitter, as well as they'll have their own websites and things as well, and a few of the kind of programs which have happened, which are quite inspiring. So some of the ones, Rod mentioned Neil Hesseltine, and that's Hilltop Farm Girl on Twitter. There's Strictly Farm, which is an organic dairy farm down in the South Lakes. Nick and Paul Renison, or Reno, they've been speaking at the Oxford Real Farming Conference as well. Horn Beef Company, James Rebanks. There's so many amazing inspiring people working in our landscapes, and these are farmers, these are partnerships, these are environmental NGOs, local businesses like Delfoot Composts, who are a real national leader in peatland restoration, who are based up here in Cumbria, whilst also producing organic compost from bracken and sheep's wool off their common. And then Oswater Catchment Management, CIC, Danny and Maddie Teasdale, who came together with their community in Glenridding to address the challenges which were coming up around flooding. So Glenridding was very seriously flooded and damaged, particularly in 2015. And they came farmers in that landscape to start looking at ways they could do natural flood management. And on the left there you can see the picture of one of the hedgerows that was planted by Oswater CIC, and so they work with a lot of farmers across the Lake District now. So I just wanted to highlight all the people, and a lot of these people I've spoken to and have really inspired what I've been able to talk to you about today. And then I was also inspired by Rod and the talk of poems, and I actually wanted to write a poem about, kind of envisioning what it might be like in the future. So here we go. Hear the whistle for the sheepdog. See the curlew flying, the eagle crying, amble across the moor, creep in woodland floor, footstep sends a flush puff of life. Meet and meet well, hedge layer, veg grower, hill and valley dweller, vibrant and bustling villages, towns and cities connected by the burgeoning lust for health as our new wealth. There we go, thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for highlighting, so many of the pertinent issues for the Northern Uplands in particular, and that poem was beautiful. So I'm going to just share briefly some of the ideas that came out of the final session of the Northern Rural Farming Conference in person before we kick off a discussion. So when we all came together in person, overjoyed at the chance to share food and chat to each other in the pub and over coffee, we spent a couple of hours really thinking about the future, and we were thinking about some of these questions and the questions that spiraled off the questions. So how can the Northern farming community have a stronger voice? Did it need a stronger voice? Did it want a stronger voice? What was their voice? How can the conference support transformational change in Northern food systems and farming systems? And how can our network work well and deliver more? And we had a whole load of conversations as a result of those key questions. And these are just some of the themes that have come out when we looked at all of the comments and the discussions. So there's something around identity. What does it mean to be Northern? Is this a self-selecting identity, or is it based on geography or mindset? The importance of place-based context, something that Hannah also mentioned, and ownership, and how do we kind of support that more, and how do we build that localism as well as the kind of connections that are beneficial on a Northern level and a wider level. Diversity was a strong theme in the discussions, again, already been highlighted. How do we include more voices? And how do we make sure that that's as inclusive a process as possible? How do we action this movement building that's needed? And we had lots of requests in the conference for more more online opportunities, more meetings, more kind of localized sub-regional networks and different ways to build connections, and like what's the most effective way of doing that and who can do that best and how. There was also a lot of comment about the real farming concept. I'm not sure how much this has been discussed or not at ORFC, but that got a lot of feedback for us in the North about whether that was divisive and exclusionary, and how do we position this, and how do we navigate that transition as things become more mainstream. And there was also a question about kind of politics and interface with political processes. Our conference was opened by the leader of the Lancaster City Council, and they have a very strong commitment around food and farming and the climate emergency. Maybe that was a part of the springboard for this conversation, but yeah, what role should the conference have in terms of interfacing with local leaders and how we hold people to account? So did anyone have any questions that you would like to, or comments you'd like to make at this point? I think we're fairly informal, so feel free to unmute and share.
I've got a quick question. Great talk. Thank you guys. I really enjoyed that. My question was, it appears that most of the focus on farming in the north, especially in the uplands, is focused on livestock. And I was wondering if there's any sort of other options for food production in the north, and how might we sort of begin to tap into those?
Yeah, great question. Rod or Hannah, do you want to pick that up?
I'll start and then hand over to Rod, because I'm sure Rod's got loads of thoughts as well. But Yeah, it is definitely predominantly livestock in the uplands, because it is marginal land and it's obviously got challenging weather conditions. But there are some really inspiring projects which are going on to increase veg production, horticulture, and also growing kind of fruit trees kind of in the valleys. So one of the examples is Vista Veg, which is over in the Eden catchment. And Lynn from Vista Veg, she's also coordinating a project called Homegrown Here. And it's come out of the Zero Carbon Cumbria project, which is a multi-million-pound project to look at net zero, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, the Homegrown Here is around a land matching service between the people who want to do horticultural growing and those who have land, who might be able to spare, say, an acre or two. And that has come up a lot. I know that the Beaumonts, Sam's mentioned it, Nick Rennison's mentioned it to me as well. There's the farmers who really want to care for the livestock, and that's what they want to do, maybe do some hedgerows and things, but they don't have the time or the energy to do the horticulture at the same time. So there's a need for this kind of matchmaking to start happening. So yeah, check out the Homegrown Here project. There's definitely other opportunities. And the Vista Veg, they grow vegetables in one of the valleys, and it's super challenging, but they do it 100%. And there's other I'm sure lots of other examples as well.
I think it's really important to try and diversify the farms, because we are so stuck in beef and sheep. And even yesterday I had a farmer, one of my neighbouring farmers came along, and he doesn't think he's going to be able to pay the rent, and it really struck home that he's struggling. What's he going to do? He's going to lose his single farm payment. Where's his future? And it may be in this, looking at the diversification, it might be for him, it might be having somewhere where people can stay in yurts or something like that. But there's an importance really to see how farmers can survive, and how we can, at the same time as surviving, we can produce food for the local market. I find a problem just selling apples. I can sell apples, but to actually make a living from selling apples, I can't do it. But I can make a living from selling vinegar, which has been really interesting, the sort of transformation. Vinegar lasts for years, so I can sell them over 3, 4, 5 years, and I'm still making a profit from them. But it's how we actually get those the local supply chains in order, so we can actually make it viable. And I think that's really sort of one of the key things. It's not just about growing the stuff, it's about how that moves, about how it's transformed into really useful products. Whether that's done at the urban side, we move stuff to the urban area, but all the villages, we can't buy anything in the local villages that's really good and healthy. So it's really, how can we get, even in every village, if we could grow some vegetables around the village to feed the village, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I'll just add really quickly, it reminded me of stacking enterprises, Rod, and that's come up quite a lot with people trying to transform their business. They have more, it's like going back to mixed farming, but in a new way. So having like poultry, mob grazing their cows, having sheep, having poultry, but also having veg, and so really stacking those enterprises to build more resilience. Yeah, and connecting locally through direct sales, which is a real kind of growing thing.
Great. Anna, did you want to add something? And then we've got a question from Tom after that.
Yeah, just in terms of facilitating veg growing, there are farms starting, like the one in Lancaster, and it's interesting that a dairy farm has hosted the first farm start project in Lancaster. But also linked to veg growing, you need to talk about seeds, and there's not currently a northern seed grower. And over the past couple of years, the Northern Seed Sovereignty Network has set itself up, and there's now an emerging seed saving collective. So getting seed grown in the north is really important for enabling better veg growing, and also yeah, that's an important part of this as well. And it looks like over the next couple of years, maybe a northern seed company will emerge, which is exciting.
Great. So I see your hand as well, Adrian. So Tom first.
Thanks. Yeah, really interesting discussion and lovely to see all the landscapes and hear about them. I just wanted to build on a point, I think it's come up a couple of times, about the real economic crunch that's facing a lot of farmers. And I guess that I just wondered whether there was potential for solidarity work of two kinds. I guess one is more obvious about tenant farmers. It seems like they're really being kind of sacrificed in these sorts of reforms that are being pushed through, from what I can make out in my reading of the coverage in the press. And so, you know, farmers that are really suffering in the north, who are often, you know, very good caretakers of the land, but are being pushed aside for these crude sort of corporate-led rewilding things, and whether there's a particular sort of northern, you know, given that the government relies on the red wall for its support, I think the conclusion's obvious of where I'm going with that. The other is more subtle. Since I've been in London, which is a few years now, I've been involved with groups of people of refugee and migrant background, and one of them managed to borrow from the National Trust an old farmhouse in the North Yorkshire moors, and they ended up getting to know the local tenant farmer really well. One of the people actually ended up picking organic veg, lying on his stomach for 10 hours a day. And they made really strong connections, ones that have continued. And they had to give the property back to the National Trust, but it's led to all sorts of other initiatives. And I just wondered, building on what Rod said about a more inclusive landscape, you've got a lot of urban populations in London and elsewhere, people of colour. I mean, you'll have seen the fantastic profusion of sessions in this ORFC of people of refugee and migrant background working the land. But I think I mean, I actually heard yesterday, maybe some of you were there, a session just saying we're encountering kind of hostility among white communities in the city who are like, we want this land for us, and we're, you know, growing our permaculture, whatever, and they can't get on the land, and they're facing hostility on the land. And I'm sure there could be a warm welcome for them in the north. So it's just that idea of strengthening those connections, and I'd be very happy to facilitate those if that's helpful. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Tom. Does anyone want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'll let Anna go.
Yeah, across the north, there are lots of very strong city of sanctuary networks around cities. And we're finding that if you're talking about the refugee and asylum community, a lot of the people that arrive here have farming backgrounds, and they're finding their way to community gardens. So there was an aim to start a garden of sanctuary project to use community gardens as a focus point for then integrating people into our communities. And there are some amazing examples of projects that are refugee and asylum seeker led across the north. So in Lancaster, on Clover Hill, we have a refugee led growing project. My head's not in Bolton, you have the kitchen, and they've got a garden linked to that again. And then you have pop-up global village cafes in Lancaster area. But then where's Charlie based? Horton Community Farm in near Leeds. Oh, my brain's gone. But there's a really inspiring projects all across the north that we can draw on as well. But it'd be interesting to hear your input on that as well, Tom.
Yeah, mine was just a really quick kind of input. Anna knows a lot more about that than I do. My focus is more land-based work, and I in rural communities, and there's a real issue that's been decades old of getting urban people into rural opportunities, and there's some real kind of systemic issues that need to be addressed to support more new entrants, people from more diverse backgrounds, to access work and opportunities for connection in rural, and that one of them is housing. Housing is a huge issue. Transport and infrastructure are just massive issues that we really need to be addressing. And one of the ways that, so I've been involved with the development of a new degree level apprenticeship, which has looked at social mobility, which is looking at that diversity more widely, and being able for people to interact with accessing land-based opportunities through online delivery where possible, and then facilitated visits to where transport and accommodation and things are provided to get the experience of land-based work through the degree level apprenticeship. So that's kind of, yeah, they're just massive issues, but the more we can get public transport and more affordable housing, that would be, yeah, really transformational.
Great, thanks. And themes to be picked up in the future, I think there. So Adrian, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Wonderful session. Thank you, all the presenters, for that. A couple of points. One is somewhere in the discussion, a thing about the movement beyond the conference. Now, a conference is great, but we need to carry the movement on. I'd be really glad to see this discussion carry on outside the conference, and would be very keen to join in with you about that, about how in Yorkshire, I'm from York, but I'm thinking North Yorkshire and the whole of Yorkshire, how we can learn a Yorkshire equivalent from the work you've been doing with the Northern Real Farming Conference, and particularly the importance of water and farming in protected landscapes. I was very struck in Nidderdale that the upper half of Harrogate Borough is the Nid area of natural beauty. The southern is loads of agricultural land, and I was wondering if we could invent something like area of natural farming with its own protections in it. Why does it have to be just the wild bits? Why can't it be the very agricultural land? I'm thinking more lowland than Hannah's stuff in upland Cumbria, but I'd just like to see this discussion carry on and echo Rod's things about learning from each other and Hannah's as well, bringing these connections together.
Hi Adrian, good to see you. Yeah, that really links to the Glover review, actually, and the landscapes review that was published, that's informing government policy, because rather than focusing on protected landscapes, the review actually focuses on national landscapes, which it changes that focus to not necessarily being within a line on the map, but actually all of those kind of landscapes which need protecting. So there'll probably, hopefully, be some movement in that as well.
Can I just add that lines on maps, local authorities seem to figure quite a lot in this, but they don't always mirror the bioregions. I'm very keen on river catchment areas, and that's come up with the Ribble Rivers Trust and the Eden Rivers Trust. I'd like to see some more active version of that in Yorkshire, but if maybe some focus on a regional level, so that we don't have to do everything in every neighbourhood or every local authority. But if we try and do some regional focus, each region can be doing something, but between us we can all be learning from each other, so we don't all have to do all the work. Try and coordinate that as well as we can. Thanks very much for the session anyway, it's brilliant.
Does anyone have any comments or thoughts they wanted to share just to close? Anna, it looks from the chat like you had an important thought just before you got thrown out of your room. Is that something for sharing?
I mean, I think it's too big, but it's a sensitive topic that I think we were going to have a discussion around it at the in-person event, but it didn't happen in the end. But it's like the colonial model of family farms, and how there's reluctance to sell to people outside of families, and that whole topic, but it's too big to bring up now and unpick and go through that.
Yeah, that was certainly a theme that we were hoping to cover at the in-person, so something to be put on the list, I think, to be picked up in future. Okay, Hannah?
Yeah, just a real kind of quick one. And Grace kind of was talking about it and how we need kind of little informal events, even just meeting at cafes, to keep the conversation going and really kind of make those personal relationships and connections, would be important. I had a good experience even on Zoom last night with the regenerative community, that someone had set up a Zoom, and it was really relaxed and informal, but really kind of a vibrant conversation. So that was just one thing I wanted to share. Great.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for all your input. We're just in the kind of review and planning stages for NRFC 2022. So if you want to connect with us, obviously drop us a line, provide any more input and thoughts, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you so much, everyone.